Mark chapter 10, verse 32. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were astonished, but those who followed him were afraid. Taking the 12 aside again, he began to tell them the things that would happen to him. See, we are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him, and he will rise after 3 days. So, backtracking a little bit, the word that was used multiple times, 3 times, to describe the disciples was astonished. And many of our Bibles will use astonished or amazed for each time to describe the disciples. But if you look at the Greek, it's actually 3 different words. So in verse 24, we see that the disciples are astonished or amazed. But if you look at the Greek, thambeo, you see that it's actually implying kind of a feeling of being frightened. And I believe that this is because they were just previously fighting for position in Christ's kingdom. But Jesus was lamenting over how hard it is for the wealthy to get into heaven. Then Jesus tells them that it's actually easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for such people to inherit the kingdom. And after he says that, they're left, the astonishment is ekpleso, which means like to knock someone out with a blow. And so they're really scared for themselves to the degree of being knocked out or being paralyzed. And then we see here in verse 32 that they're still in this state of shock, but as they're following him, it develops into phobeo, which is where we get the word phobia. And this means being struck with fear or having fear that causes one to flee. And so they're not just in this state of shock with the teachings of Jesus and its contrast to how they were feeling and the desires of their hearts. They weren't just in this state of shock, but they may have been contemplating bailing on Jesus, on leaving him, on running away from what they signed up for, right? Maybe they were thinking that this isn't exactly what I thought I was signing up for. I didn't give up all of my wealth and my life to come to this. And so many of them may have been experiencing this sort of perhaps regret to the degree of wanting to flee. And we see that this is probably what was going through the disciples as they were as these feelings really manifested, especially in Judas' betrayal, and that was specifically for money. So obviously he had other thoughts, other plans, and then we also saw it in Peter's denial, this sort of this crippling fear. Verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached him and said, "Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask you." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked them. They answered him, "Allow us to sit at your right and at your left in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I drink or to be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We are able," they told him. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink, and you will be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not mine to give. Instead, it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 disciples heard this, they began to be indignant with James and John. Jesus called them over and said to them, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So this is the first time that James and John act out on their own, apart from the other disciples, and they do this out of this sort of selfish ambition, and they ask Jesus to say yes before even asking the question, even before making their request, because they knew they were being selfish. It's a lot like when children, they've been asking their parents for something and have been denied over and over, and they know that that they're not going to get it, that it's not going to be pleasing to their parents, and so they make this kind of last ditch attempt. But before they make that same request, and they know how their parents are going to feel about it, they, ask them to, please say yes before even saying what it is, right? And in the same way, they have this they show this kind of a very childish selfishness, these desires that keep going, that keep contrasting the teachings of Jesus. And this right side and the left side that they're asking about, the right side was the highest position next to the throne, and the left was the second highest. And if you to make this point, to further this point of how kind of childish they're being, in Matthew chapter 20 verses 20 through 21, we see the same exchange, but in Matthew's account, we actually see that they brought their mother with them to make this request on their behalf, right? They bring their mom to try to persuade Jesus even further. And so we just see this kind of childish selfishness play out in these disciples, and to further show just how childish these disciples are and how much they're not getting it. The other disciples are indignant when they see James and John trying to, get ahead of them. But what is this cup and this baptism that Jesus is talking about? The cup represents the suffering and the persecution that he's going to endure, and the baptism is his death. And in doing this, in revealing what he's going to have to endure, he really even prophesies of James and John's futures, of how James is going to be martyred, and John will eventually be exiled to the island Patmos, and Jesus reminds them that it will be God that will decide how they will receive honor. And going deeper into Jesus' teachings, he tells them that if you want to become great, if you want to be great in my kingdom, you need to become a servant. And the Greek word here is diakonos, and this is someone like a waiter, someone that waits tables, right? Someone that you might, like someone that you meet when you go to a restaurant. These days we're not able to sit inside restaurants, but we can all remember what it's like being at a restaurant. But just having that server that is always, checking up on us, asking us what we need, looking to give us good service, looking to serve us. And this is the way that Jesus tells us that we can become great in his kingdom, by serving others in this manner. And then he even furthers his point by saying that whoever wants to become the greatest needs to become doulos, which means a slave, someone that is lower than even a servant, right? And so he really responds to the disciples' desires to be, first and second, right? To be at Jesus' right and at his left, by saying that in order to be that, in order to be at my right, in order to be at my left, you need to become like a servant, or even a slave, in order to be considered in the highest place in my kingdom. This is the way you ought to live, the lifestyle that you're supposed to keep as my follower. Because even for Jesus, who is the Son of Man, the Messiah, the King above all kings, even he doesn't seek to be served, but he lays his life down as a ransom. And what's a ransom, right? We we know of this word from, we see like movies, and there's a bank robbery, and then there's some hostages, right? And they try to make the police try to make negotiations with them, and they give them a ransom, right? A price that needs to be paid for the release of these hostages, for their freedom. And so in the same way, Jesus explains that he lays his life down for a ransom, that we are hostages to sin, and Jesus pays the price for our freedom. Verse 46. They came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the road. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many warned him to keep quiet, but he was crying out all the more, "Have mercy on me, Son of David." Jesus stopped and called him. So they called the blind man and said to him, "Have courage, get up. He's calling for you." He threw off his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. Then Jesus answered him, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Rabboni," the blind man said to him, "I want to see." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has saved you." Immediately he could see and began to follow Jesus on the road. So what is the significance of this blind man calling Jesus Son of David? What is the implication behind this title of being the Son of David, right? And this had very messianic implications, right? The Old Testament, prophesied about the Messiah, right? The king of this everlasting kingdom coming from the bloodline of David, right? Being a descendant of David. And so this man, and just simply calling Jesus Son of David, and this is the only time that we see it in the book of Mark, but him just calling Jesus the Son of David shows that he got it, that he he got the revelation of who Jesus is, right? So many people were struggling with whether or not Jesus was a true Messiah, but he shows in simply calling him the Son of David that he got it, that he understood that Jesus was the Messiah. He is the one that the Israelites, the people of God, have been waiting for all these years. And then the people that were trying to keep him quiet, right, trying to hush him from the beginning, when Jesus calls on him, they tell him to be of good cheer, to be happy, right? You're so blessed to be able to be called by Jesus. And they kind of show that they have this belief, this faith that Jesus is capable of performing these miracles. But we know that it wasn't just the physical healing alone that enabled him to follow Jesus, right? Because we see in another parable in the Gospels that there was in another story there was 10 lepers who were healed, but only one came back to thank Jesus, and so we know that just physical healing alone doesn't enable someone to follow Jesus. They could very well be thankful for it and then just go home, go back on their way, go back to just regular old life. But we see here when he was saved, the word used here is actually sozo, which means physical and spiritual healing. And so this man didn't just have a physical healing, but he had a holistic healing. He was healed from the inside out, where it wasn't just the physical, but it was also the spiritual, and it was a spiritual healing that enabled him ultimately to follow Jesus. A few prayer points. Number one, do you have the same sort of paralyzing fear that the disciples had in this passage today? Are you gospel phobic because of what it may bring, the kind of consequences that might arise from you living gospel-centered. 2 Timothy chapter 1 tells us, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but one of power, love, and sound judgment. So don't be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, right? Don't be ashamed of the gospel, right? Do you still have this? Do you share this kind of crippling fear, or do you have a spirit of boldness that enables you and empowers you to be someone of the gospel that lives out the gospel? Number two, do you live out this kingdom lifestyle of servanthood, of being a slave to all in your own home, in your own family? I think that a big tragedy is that many of us, we are our worst selves. We are the worst versions of ourselves in our own homes, in the very places of our loved ones, the ones that love us most. And I think that because there's really no reward in showing, what kind of person I am at home, because no one really sees it and there won't be any acknowledgement. We tend to be as comfortable as we want at home, and we tend to be very lazy with how we treat others in our homes. But the home, the private place, is where we develop true character. It's when we are able to live out this sort of lifestyle, live out these morals and values, when there's no acknowledgement, when there isn't necessarily a reward, that we truly build character. We truly build for ourselves morals and values and principles that we truly care about and will live out in any situation. And so, are you living out this kingdom lifestyle at home? And lastly, number three, do you only know God physically, or do you know Him spiritually as well? As we see in the blind man here. It was that holistic healing, right? It was the spiritual healing that really enabled him to follow Jesus and to live out this new lifestyle. And so, do you know God spiritually? Do you know Him deep down? Do you know Him on the inside, right? Or is it just motions and actions that you go through? Because you have to know Him. You have to know Him deep down. You have to believe, and you have to trust, and you have to love Him really from the inside out in order for you to truly follow Him and live out your faith. And so, do you know God spiritually?